Right, hello and welcome everybody to today's meeting of Planning Committee B. My name's Councillor Hollier, I'm the chair of the committee. You'll see down either side the other members of the committee, and at the top of the tables we've got various planning, democracy, legal officers. And if I could just ask if officers could introduce themselves the first time they speak, just so we know who everyone is. In terms of apologies, we've got apologies from Councillor Crawshaw, who's substituted by Councillor Kilbane, so welcome today. That's the only apology I've got. If I could just ask if there's any declarations of interest. No, can't see any. So the minutes of the last meeting, which was only 2 days ago, obviously aren't ready yet, so I'm sure we'll approve those at our next meeting. And there's no speakers under the general public participation item on the agenda. Just say for the benefit of public speakers, we've got 3 items on the agenda today. What we always do is start with an update from the planning officers, then with a few sort of initial questions just on the presentation that's been given. There'll then be the opportunity for public speakers to address the committee, followed again by more questions from the committee to officers. We'll then enter a debate stage in which the committee will come to a sort of view on what they think about the application. And then in line with our new constitutional arrangements, I'll invite members whether they'd wish to move the officer's recommendation. If they do and that's seconded, we'll then vote on the officer's recommendation. If not, we'll invite other recommendations that might be put forward. But if we could start then with item 4A. And Gareth, if you're able to.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is an application under Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act, which is a variation to the design of a variation of condition attached to a previous planning permission. And this is to vary the design of an approved house at plot 4 on the former Piggeries site in Main Street, Holtby. Planning permission was originally granted in 2014 for 4 detached dwellings. So as a revised scheme in 2017, 3 of the dwellings are now complete. So this application relates to plot number 4. Oops, wrong one. Plot number 4, which is on the screen, hopefully, yes, in this corner. I just noticed the address. That's the old address of the Piggeries. So just to be clear, the access to this property is actually taken from Holtby Lane, which is to the south of the site, or a long drive up the side of Canberra Lodge. The new house there. Plot 2 and plot 3 of the development. Plot 4 on the other side of this little access road. This is the proposal in front of you. So 2-storey with single-storey wings, facing brickwork, red pink brick, and natural slate roof. This is the scheme that was given permission in 2017, actually given permission in 2019, an application in 2017. So plot 4 up here, and you can, and then plots 1, 2, and 3 clustered around the head of that cul-de-sac. So you can see that the variation that's proposed in the orientation and design, and there's the design of the approved house. Some photos. So this is from Holtby Lane, the site here, and you can see the new build properties, and then that cul-de-sac with the 3 plots 1, 2, and 3, and another photograph of the same pretty much the same view up the head of the cul-de-sac with the plots 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, that's that. We have received a letter a couple of days ago, further objection, supporting the views of the parish council, which was an objection to the planning application. This states that I live in a neighbouring property. I strongly object to any planned amendments that would result in a larger, repositioned or taller dwelling due to the potential invasion of privacy and restricted view from the rear of my property. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the committee just on the plans we've seen, Councillor Galvin?
Have you got, Gareth, how it was in the original application, the way it was?
I don't have the original 2011 scheme. I've got the last approval, which is this one.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my head around what the difference is between what was and what is now being applied for.
Yeah, there's a. In terms of its orientation, these two orientations are the same. Yeah, they're roughly the same. So this one has its main two-story elements here, and this single story and a single story out the back. And the previous scheme, that was the main two-story element with a single story, that elevation. So it's twisted. Sorry. Yeah, slightly twisted on each part. So this section here is the new section, new single story section comes out on this bit here. It is slightly closer to Canberra Lodge and also to plot 3, but the distances are still significant. The 2017 to the Canberra Lodge house itself, it was 60 metres, and the current proposal from the two-story element anyway, it's 55 metres. And then it's 1 metre closer to plot 3.
Okay, Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Gareth. And again, just for clarification, so in terms of the two-storiness of the new application, is there more or less two-story height, or is it about the same for compared to the original application?
In terms of its total height, it's pretty much the same at about 9 metres. I think the original scheme was 9, and this is 9.1. So it's pretty much the same. This element, this two-story element here, is 20 metres in length. The previous approval, that section was 14 metres, and that section was 6.5, so that was 20.5 metres, but with that slight break in the ridge line there. I think at first floor, the floor space is pretty much the same. Most of the increase in the size of the property is at ground floor, and that garage wing probably accounts for a significant part of it.
Councillor Orrell.
Not on the plans, but on the conditions. Are these the conditions for the whole development?
Yes.
Right.
Because of the way they've submitted their application, we reimpose all the conditions again, but we would have only amended those conditions where they relate to this particular property.
Right, because there's a condition about EV charging, but there's no other sustainability conditions.
Right, okay. The reason for that is probably that the updated 2021 edition of the building regs is very similar to our CC1, CC2 requirements. So it won't have been reimposed if there was a condition on the original permission, because that original permission would have predated the current local plan. So it may well be there wasn't one on that.
So
But in terms of carbon reduction, then the building regs that are in place at the moment will match, potentially exceed what's currently in the local plan policy, although that policy is subject to a modification now. I did check, there is no, as far as I could see, there's no building regulations approval in place on this plot. There was a small window where people could, if they applied in time, they could comply with the 2013 building regs. That doesn't seem to be the case here.
So we don't need to do anything to ensure that?
No, we don't.
Right, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Just a similar question in terms of the commencement condition,
Oh, right.
which I think is so number one. Is that restarting the clock from now for this, or is it already essentially being discharged because the other plots have been built?
Yes. Yes, if yeah, that's well spotted. We should take off that condition because the development has already commenced, and we shouldn't. It's unlawful to put a condition on which extends the time period of the planning permission. So granting this, because the development as a whole has already commenced with the construction of those three houses, this plan, if this permission is granted, then it will be in place, well, in perpetuity, I guess, until the planning system is changed.
Okay. Any further questions? No, I can't see any. So we've got two speakers on this item. The first is Councillor Waters, who I believe is dialing in. And are you able to hear me, Councillor Waters?
Yes, I can hear you. Am I clear?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. You'll know you've got 3 minutes to address the committee. If you'd like to make a start in your own time, and I'll try and give you a sort of warning. It's about 30 seconds to go.
Right, thank you, Chair. Well over 10 years ago, an application to redevelop a site of disused farm buildings, Holtby Piggeries, was submitted and resisted by council planning officers. The parish council and many residents wanted the site sorting out, so it was unfortunate that the original plans went to Area Planning Committee with an officer recommendation to refuse. On that committee, I was able to press the case for approval to have this brownfield site built on with appropriate plans to tidy up the site for residents with an important benefit of footpath provision under a Section 106 agreement. Subsequent to that and changes in planning law, the Section 106 footpath contribution has been lost, and now, after all this time, you are being asked to approve a further change to the plans for this small development. The support of the parish council and residents to this development was on the basis of an in-keeping traditional design of the properties. 3 of the 4 have been completed as planned and are an attractive, consistent standard. There should be no change to that formula now. What was the point of the parish council and residents producing a village design statement many years ago if it is disregarded so readily as in paragraph 5.8? Of course, this site falls outside of the village envelope as written in 2005. It wasn't envisaged to be developed at that time. All the parish council and residents in this small settlement of Holtby seek is to protect their built environment in a way that planning officers seem reluctant to do so. What is the point in parish councils, residents, In fact, anyone engaging with the planning process over many years, feeling that they have achieved a fair and reasonable solution in terms of design, layout and materials, only to see it potentially swept away when a so-called contemporary plan comes along. There is a good deal of interest in your decision today, not only in Holtby, but further afield. Failure to adhere to the original plans will open the way to similar moves on other approvals and will certainly draw into question the worth of any constructive engagement by local communities with the City of York Council Planning Department in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And if you just hang on a second, I'll just ask if the committee have any questions. I can see Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Councillor Waters. Could you please provide a little bit more detail on how you feel this isn't in keeping with other dwellings in the area and the village design statement?
The easiest way to answer that is if you, if Gareth there has got the planning file up with the original, or should I say the 2017 approval, and look at that side by side with what's proposed today. Is he able to provide you with that?
Yes, I think those are part of the pack we've got, aren't they? Are you looking to speak to those or just suggesting that we...
Well, I'm suggesting that you consider those plans and bear in mind that 3 of the properties have already been built to the original approval, which was a pleasing design for a rural area. What's proposed now will not be in harmony with what's already been built.
Okay, Councillor Melly's got another question.
Yeah, the extract of the village design statement that we've got in the papers says that new buildings should include reddish bricks and blue or grey slates, that sort of thing, which this application seems to be in keeping with. Are there any other aspects of the village design statement that you'd like to draw our attention to that this isn't in keeping with?
The village design statement will have reflected the mix in properties. Some have red pan tiles, a few have slates, but that particular development was all planned to be red pan tiles, red clay pan tiles. So again, why change it now?
Okay, Councillor Melly.
Also in the paragraph we've got in our papers about the village design statement, it says that this development falls outside of the envelope as defined in the village design statement. So I'll ask officers as well, but I just thought I'd give you the opportunity to say what weight you feel the village design statement should be given to a development that's actually outside of the bounds of it.
The village design statement was written in 2005, before this ever made it into a planning application. So whether you understand that the village design statement at that time was concentrating on the properties, the physical properties that existed in the village and the potential for infill. This at the time was a disused farm.
Okay.
And as for weight for the village design statements, if they are disregarded in this manner, because I've seen them disregarded in various villages, not just in this ward over the years, then what confidence can people have in the neighbourhood plans going forward?
Okay, I can't see any further questions from the committee, so I'll thank you for your time this evening, Councillor Waters.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker then is Jeremy Dowell, who's speaking in support. If you're able to join us at the middle seat. Great, thank you. Yes, and you've got 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a warning with about 30 seconds to go, but if you'd like to make a start.
Chair, members, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. The principle of residential development on this site has already been established by the current planning approval and the erection of 4 dwellings. 3 of the approved dwellings are now complete. We are seeking approval for a variation of condition application for the remaining dwellings to alter the internal layout and external appearance. The siting and orientation of the proposed dwelling has been a carefully considered response to both the existing approval and the amenity of neighbouring dwellings that bound the site. The proposed dwelling will be located some distance from Holtby Lane and largely hidden by the existing vegetation and neighbouring properties that front onto Holtby Lane. While considering the design and appearance of the proposed, reference has been made to the Holtby Village Design Statement. The statement notes, typically the buildings are of clamped brick construction with pan-tile or slate roofs. Vernacular is the local style of architecture. The proportion and scale of those buildings are not always regular. Doors and window openings are often inserted into the building or in some instance blocked up, indicating the evolution that has taken place over the lifespan. The current planning approval is designed to represent a traditional farmhouse with its converted ancillary outbuildings. Traditionally within a village, a farmhouse would form part of the village street scene, fronting the road with a small private frontage as part of the traditional ribbon development that forms a historic village core. All buildings to the rear of the farmhouse would be ancillary, forming the workings of the farm. We therefore propose a simple contemporary linear barn form with single-storey ancillary additions. The main two-storey body of the proposed dwelling will be constructed in brick with simple detailing, irregular glazed openings with a slate roof. Glazing will be set back in the opening to provide a deep reveal and some articulation to the elevation. The irregular openings are a representation of those found on traditional ancillary farm buildings, which are constructed and then subsequently altered over time. The two-storey elements are proposed, representing the evolution and subsequent adaptation a typical farm building would endure throughout its use. With the sensitivity of this site in mind, the proposed design and material choice made are a considered response that aims to create an exemplar residential development that complements neighbouring properties and has a positive impact upon the village. With environmental impact in mind, the proposed dwelling will be constructed using a high level of insulation and will incorporate several sustainable technological features. Heating and hot water will be provided via air source heat pumps, which in turn will be powered by solar panels located on the garage roof. The solar panels will be incorporated to a dedicated battery storage system, and 2 electric vehicle charging points will be provided in the garage. In summary, we consider that the internal layout design, barn style, external appearance and orientation are a considered sensitive and appropriate response to the site's context, its surrounding and the village of Holtby. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. I'll just ask if the committee have any questions. Councillor Kilburn.
Thanks. Why did you change the design?
To meet the client's requirements. The site came up for sale, and my client purchased the land, and this is an opportunity for them to build their own home, and obviously in doing so want something that suits them.
Any further questions? Can't see any, so thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
If we could move back then to questions to the planning officers. I had one to start, which was Councillor Walters mentioned a path. Was that part of the Section 106 agreement, or is it elsewhere?
Originally, it's certainly in the 2011 planning permission, 2014 consent. There was a path that was proposed. My recollection is that was an offer made by the landowner that was incorporated into the design, but there were difficulties in actually bringing it forward, actually building it within the confines of the public highway. So as far as I can tell, that was not taken forward, and the Section 106 agreement now refers to affordable housing and sports contributions. But yeah, I'm afraid I can't give you chapter and verse on the footway.
Okay, but that will have fallen out in the previous application, so isn't.
That's my recollection. Yes, it's not secured through this planning permission.
Okay. Okay, are there any further questions? Councillor Fisher?
The VDS, first of all, can we just clarify that is non-statutory guidance, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a supplementary planning document. Yes,
But
it
it's
has
non-statutory.
weight in the decision-making
Right.
process.
Would you argue that, would you consider that a VDS made in 2005 could be considered to be now out of date? Because you may recall the recent planning inspector's decision in Earswick where they concluded that a neighbourhood plan made in 2020 was out of date. The other point about this being outside the village envelope, which is what considered, because it worries me about, I can't see any real conflict with what it says in the VDS about the design of this dwelling. It seems to conform in the sense that it has got red clamp bricks, it's got a slate roof, which is different from the others on the site, but it's not in contravention with the village design statement. So I'm finding it a little bit difficult to judge how the village design statement would contravene this application.
Yeah. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's out of date. It rather depends whether any of the policies have been overtaken by circumstances. But about when a lot of those policies are about, the setting of the village, the appearance of the village. I think even though they're now 16, they were written 16 or more years ago. There's probably not been that level of change to say that they're out of date now. But the issue about the village envelope is relevant. The village design guide is largely, as far as I can tell, is about what's within the village envelope. I imagine that the village envelope followed when this was considered to be a village washed over by the green belts, and it would have had an envelope defined in the 2005 local plan, but that doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, most of it appears to be written for the core of the village rather than outlying buildings. It doesn't specifically say it's not, but it doesn't cover them. So I'm not sure I can answer. I don't think I can definitively. I've had a look. It doesn't say this relates only to the village envelope.
Thank you.
But it implies it.
Clear enough.
Okay, any further questions for the officers? If not, are we happy to move to debate? And if so, is anybody willing to make a start? Councillor
I
Gall.
usually do. Everybody sits on their hands. Chair, as far as I'm concerned, this is a fairly simple issue. There is no argument as to whether a property can be built on this land. It quite clearly, that's long gone. The owner of the land or whoever has offered this site for sale, and somebody's come along and said, look, I would like to design the house in this manner. I wonder, Chair, if we went round this city and looked at all the properties that probably were modernistic, even surrounded by older properties, whether that would change anything at all. As far as I'm concerned, yeah, it is a change. Whether it's a major change or a minor change might be open to debate. And I can see absolutely no reason why we can't grant permission for this. If this was turned down, I'd risk putting a quid on an appeal being more than successful with costs probably awarded. So I'm quite happy, Chair. If it's too early to move it, I'll let somebody else have a go. But I'm mindful to move the application but let's see what others have to say.
Is there any further comments to be made, or Councillor Fisher?
Thank you, Chair. I've looked at the original application. I think the building that was designed then is possibly more aesthetically pleasing than the one that's been produced. But clearly, if this one meets the requirements of the applicant better, then that's what we know what he's applied for.
Yeah.
Does it contravene the VDS? Does it contribute planning policy? No, the principle is clearly established on this site. The building, in my view, matches the materials in the VDS. I've looked at the siting of it. It's only marginally closer to the plot 3, so I don't think there could be any issues to regards of loss of privacy or overlooking. And as we all know, the right to a view is not something you enjoy in perpetuity. People have the right to, build. I know that by personal experience. I used to have a lovely view of the Hamilton Hills. Now I don't, because somebody built 2 massive houses. That's the way things go. So I'm like Councillor Galvin. I would be, if he was prepared to move approval, I would second approval.
I'll move it, Chair.
And I'll second it then.
Is there any further debate? Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. And Gareth, if you could give us a summary before the vote.
Chair, so the recommendation was that permission be approved, subject to the condition in the report, removing condition 1. And then subject to a variation to the existing section 106 agreement to ensure that the permission is subject to the obligations currently in place in respect to the earlier planning permission.
Okay. Can I then see all those in favour of Councillor Galvin's proposal? Okay, so that's unanimous and that's approved. Okay, thank you very much. I think we can move straight on to item. If we take items 4B and 4C together for the purposes of the officers' report and updates, but we'll need 2 separate votes on each item.
Hello, I'm Neil Massey. Yeah, okay, sorry. Thank you, Chair. So this, so there were 2 planning applications in front of us in respect to the Union Terrace car park. Are we okay to go? Yeah, okay. So one is for the installation of an ultra rapid charging hub for electric vehicles for 8 charging units under a solar photovoltaic canopy. And a compound for the electrical equipment. And then the second application is an application under the advertisement regulations for a totem sign. So the site is Union Terrace car park. So this location here, we've got Clarence Street, York St John University, and the entrance to the car park section of the car park. You just see the corner of the toilet block there. There's the entrance from Clarence Street. The current location of the blue badge holder parking spaces with Clarence Street beyond. This is the access into the corner of the site. So here's the blue badge holder spaces, the amenity block, and this opens up onto Clarence Street, close to its junction with St. Lord Mayor's Walk and Chilligate. This is, so that photograph was taken in this location here. So this is the current layout of the car park with blue badge holder spaces, general parking, the coach park, public toilets, and the motorcycle bays. This is a proposal in front of us. So here's the canopy, the electrical services compound and substation, the relocated blue badge holder spaces, These are there's two existing electric vehicle charging units here, and these are being converted into blue badge holder spaces with the charging units, with the charging units still in place. And a demarked route round onto Clarence Street. Well, that would still be possible to walk through the car park and use that existing entrance. And that shows the location of the totem advertisement sign. The canopy details. Very similar design to the one that's been installed in at Monk's Cross. And that's the details of the compound. And that's the detail of the advertisement. And that's it.
Hello, yes, this is the update. Since the report was published, we had a further letter of representation objecting to the proposal. It raised similar concerns as previously, considered that the new spaces are too far from the locations where the users will be going to, and also expresses concerns that people using the spaces are adjacent to the main route into the car park and consider that's a hazard. Within the report, there's now at page 5.18, paragraph 5.18 and 5.22. It refers to the where Gareth mentioned the existing charging area. I referred to that as it currently being a disabled blue badge parking charging area, but it's actually a charging area anyone can use. And it's being redesigned specifically only for charging vehicles for blue badge holders, and only they will be able to park there when charging a vehicle. And we received a revised plan on the 18th of October, which Gareth is showing there, which better indicates really the footpath links out from the site onto Clarence Street. So if the application is approved, it would need to refer to updated plans.
Okay. Is there any questions from the committee on the initial plans? Councillor Orwell, that's all.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You referred to the Monk's Cross hyperhub. Are the clearances for vehicles using it as the same as at Monk's Cross?
Yes, I understand it is. It's almost an identical scheme. I think the fence at Monk's Cross might be slightly lower. That to me seems the only difference really. It's almost
It didn't seem as though there was as much room as there is at Monk's Cross. But
no. Okay.
In terms of, are you talking about the circulation areas?
Yes.
Around?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Monk's Cross has got a route where you drive in, then circle around and go out. This one, you drive in reverse out and go the same way you go in. Sorry.
Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. It's not a question about the plans, but there was just something I wanted to clarify. In the papers where it says who the applicant is, there's a individual's name. I believe they're the project manager employed by the council. I just wanted to be clear that the applicant is City of York Council. Yeah, I think that's important for transparency.
Yeah, that's
and when members are trying to assess whether they have a conflict and taking part. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Councillor Crackhill and then Councillor Kilbane.
Yeah, I just wondered if you could help me out. Can you just point out where the blue badge parking bays are at the moment? I want to know this, but I'd just like to be quite sure, please. I should do, but I don't walk every single inch of the car park all the time.
So at the moment they're in this area here. So
They are,
those in
right.
there's a line of trees and then Clarence Street, and then there's another couple there facing onto the back of Terrace properties.
Right, okay. And then in the proposed relocation, how are do people drive, where they're next to the highway, to the entrance road, will people still drive in? How will people drive in to access? They're not accessed directly from the entrance road, are they? They'd still drive in and then park through. There's 2 rows, aren't there? Of
Yeah, at
bays.
the moment, there's a right-hand turning lane. And then you can, it is tight, but you can turn in there, or you can circulate around. And I don't think it's demarked as a one-way system. I think people can just drive 2 ways through it.
But in the new plan, you'd still drive in and round into the bays, would you, into the disabled parking bays?
Well, did you say
So the back of your vehicle would be, which way would the back of your vehicle be facing? Would it be facing into the car park or towards the entrance road?
Well, it depends how you, it depends how you park. You could have a reverse in, or you could.
So you could do either.
I suppose if people have a wheelchair or a mobility scooter, then they would drive in. And then there's, as with the existing spaces, there's this area behind them, which is kind of denoted as a walkway across the back of those spaces.
But then they'd be unloading onto the walkway if they needed a bit more room than the cross hatching gives you.
Yes.
Or they could go the other way, but in that case, they'd be in the other line of parking bays, wouldn't they?
I suppose if you had to take something bulky out of the back, then I don't think you would reverse into that space unless there wasn't a car directly behind you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so at the moment, the in that location, but they're not designated as.
Okay, I had Councillor Kilbane and then Councillor Orrell.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I suppose it could be a question for you, Chair, maybe a question for legal. Given that this is a City of York application, is it appropriate to have a member of the executive and wife of the transport executive member sat in judgment on their own application in this committee?
Well, we had exactly this question yesterday, and I suspect exactly the same answer will be given, which is it's up to Councillor Craghill to decide whether or not she thinks she has a conflict. She's sat there, so I assume she thinks she doesn't. Any further? Sorry, Councillor Orrell.
Thank you. Following up from Councillor Craghill's very sensible question, the existing parking spaces for disabled, if you're getting a wheelchair or other equipment out there, you've got a lot of space behind it. If you're going into the proposed disabled parking spaces, you're then taking a wheelchair or other equipment out into the flow of traffic that's coming into the car park. I mean, is that's correct?
Well, that's a statement of fact. That's not incorrect.
I think I'd Councillor Melly and then I'll.
Just wanted to comment on that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's go with you.
All I was going to say was, it's the same as Esplanade. You have to bring a wheelchair out into the flow of traffic. I think it's the same on the car park at the castle. And if I was guessing, on most of the car parks, that applies. It's the same on the park and ride.
Doesn't make it right.
I'm not saying it does make it right. What I'm saying is, I mean, my opinion is slightly different to everybody else's on whether about the hub, but that's another argument. There is very little difference, quite frankly. And somebody who lifts a wheelchair in and out from time to time, if cars go hurtling through the car park that they can't stop, then it doesn't matter whether it's a wheelchair or a child in a pushchair. You know, you're in that sort of scenario. Anyway,
We'll try and keep it to questions. Councillor Melly.
No, my question was already asked. It was just about, usually accessible parking bays aren't just wider than standard bays. They are longer to allow for that space for, yeah, if somebody needs a ramp out the back of their van or something. So, but it looks like that is accounted for, and there is a hatched area, and it means that the roadway will be narrower to allow for that extra space, for these spaces taking up more space than the current
On the
spaces.
new.
Yeah.
I think it's to a degree that that's an illustration. There's a condition that if it is approved, we have the details in terms of design. But the actual width going into the car park is sufficient for 2 cars to pass, and also for an area behind the parking space to be protected as well. So you've got the standard 4.8 meters depth. You could put a metre or so behind that as well.
So it is a protected hatched area rather than immediately into the roadway.
It wouldn't be to road, or whether in design terms they could use that also as a walking area. I'm not sure whether it could be a walking area and a protected area, or you'd have the protected area and then the walking area beyond that be subject to the design.
There has always historically, worn out by generations of tyres. I think there has always been a demarked line along the back of those bays that's just very faint at the moment. So this would be redrawing that line, repainting that line, I should say. So it has existed, which suggests that it's wide enough there for 2 passing vehicles and that demarcated space.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the additional distance. Just can you help me with understanding, is that just the distance from the new spaces to the sort of main entrance, or does that take into account that the spaces where they are currently used, that cut through at the edge of the car park, is it sort of
In terms of the way I've calculated, generally on average it's about 50 metres further from the proposed spaces and the existing. I've measured the proposed spaces, the yellow ones on there, taking the routes along the footpath onto Clarence Street and then round, whereas the blue badge spaces in the corner, you just come out of the car into that corner. I've measured it pretty much from where that red dot is. So on average, it's about 50 metres further. I think for the furthest space, for the new parking layout, it'd be 86 metres with the blue badge space from the red dots, whereas the existing ones, the furthest is 35 metres. And then the closest is about 18 metres to the red dots, and the closest from the new spaces would be about 64 metres. So it all averages out to about 50 metres.
So another way of putting that is 3 times as far, roughly.
What's the average now? Yeah.
Any further questions at this point? If not, if we can move on to our public speakers. The first of which is Flick Williams, who's joining us via Zoom. And can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. And if, yeah, you'll know you've got 3 minutes to address the committee. If you could stay on the line after you've spoken, just in case there's any questions. But if you'd like to make a start in your own time, please.
I objected to the original proposal. I objected to the revised proposal, and I object to this amended proposal coming before you today, which prior to reading the committee papers, I had not even seen. I thought planning automatically sent details of revised schemes to objectors, but clearly not in this case. I note the moving of replacement blue badge spaces closer to where they're currently located, but to add 50 to 55 metres to the pedestrian journey is not acceptable. Blue badges are issued on the basis of holders struggling with a distance of 50 metres. I note this is justified in the papers by some smoke and mirrors calculations with a good measure of assumption thrown in. Discussions amongst disabled people show this car park is not used by people to access the city centre, rather St John University and businesses in Gillygate. Taking St Sampson's Square as the centre point of the city, as the Martin Higgett Associates report did, shows that Union Terrace car park is more than 1,000 metres from there. So common sense tells you that this is not how disabled people use them. And citing the distance added to the huge distance to the city centre as insignificant is therefore disingenuous and misleading. Furthermore, there has not been sufficient thought given to how disabled people can move safely in this environment. By keeping the existing pedestrian exit onto Gilligate open, disabled pedestrians will therefore be travelling through the new hyperhub area. As this is for ultra rapid charging, these hyperhubs better resemble a petrol filling station forecourt with the quick and constant flow of vehicles when fully in use. It is appropriate that disabled people, is it appropriate that disabled people, which will include blind and visually impaired people unable to hear the movement of electric vehicles, wheelchair users who are below the height of many vehicles and cannot easily be seen, and ambulant mobility impaired people who will not be able to move quickly out of the path of moving vehicles. The alternative, crossing the zebra crossing to use the vehicular exit entrance, adds distance and requires people to travel in the opposite direction to their destination and is therefore contraindicated for those for whom every additional step causes significant pain, fatigue and exhaustion. The relocation of cycle stands close to the toilet block, which I can only assume will be by the motorcycle parking, is potentially an additional hazard to those blue badge holders using the 2 EV charging blue badge spaces. My original objection included the absence of an equalities impact assessment. The latest fashion within this council appears to be the repetitive printing of the legal wording of the public sector equality duty from the legislation. This is not and never will be an equalities impact assessment. Once again, it appears that disabled people are collateral damage to other council objectives that are deemed to be a priority. And when you pass this, as it seems inevitable that you will, please note the publication of the PAS 1899, the British Standard Accessible Charging Specifications for Electric Vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you're just able to bear with us a second, I'll just ask if the committee have any questions. I can't see any, so I'll thank you for your time this evening. Your comments will be taken on board. If we could move on then to Stuart Andrews, who's speaking as the applicant.
Yeah, hi. I'm more here to answer questions for whatever comes up than to speak on this point. I mean, if you want to address any of the points that have just been raised, I'm happy to.
I think we just go straight to questions if there are any. Councillor Kilbane.
Hi, thanks, Stuart. Can I ask why there isn't an equalities impact assessment?
Hyperhubs was designed when this was, what was it called now? It was under a different name. An assessment was done for the hyperhubs in general. In terms of actual access, we have looked at accessibility, and that was in the original assessment. We do follow as much as we can the PAS 1889 guidelines, which have just been released. They are only guidelines. We designed this well in advance of their release, and we've hit virtually every point they've suggested in there already. So in terms of access, I think we're quite well covered on that.
Sorry, yeah, I meant an equalities impact assessment of moving the disabled base to the new location.
No, that wasn't in the original planning application, as it's white lines at a car park and didn't require planning permission. The original application was submitted to parking services. We acknowledged the fact that we needed to move them. We gave them several recommendations where we thought we could do them, and their response at that point was that we'd look at this once we got through planning permission to decide on the final layout for where we move those bays to. Since then, we've had a complaint come in, so we've then put forward a couple of these designs, and council staff have recommended this one as their preferred option of where to move the bays to.
I'm just trying to understand this. Are you saying that there was no equalities impact assessment of moving the bays because we didn't have to do one, or what?
No, it's just that you're asking about an equalities impact assessment for just another variation to the design. The original hyperhub design did go through that process, though it was under a different name at the time in the council. But we've not done a specific equalities impact assessment, as in the new document that's been introduced in the last few years, on this specific change.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just trying to get clarity on this. No, I'm not asking about the hyperhub. I'm asking about the movement of the blue badge spaces, the impact that has in terms of equalities. Is there any assessment done of that?
I'm struggling to, in terms of the project management documentation we fill in, that would have been done as a project for a whole. We have obviously looked at the options and the impact of doing this to a disabled person in terms of the extra distance and the best place to place these parking spaces. If you're referring to the project documentation that we've considered to do at the start of the project during startup, there isn't one specifically for this one part of that project, no.
Okay, so on that basis, then what is the equalities impact on a disabled person of moving the parking bays?
Do you want me to go through the whole sort of list of everything that we could produce for that? I mean, first of all, we've got extra distance through the car park, and we have the relocation to a different area of the car park, which, as has been noted, is close to the main entrance and to the main flow of traffic. In terms of space, the spaces we're providing on here are identical to the ones that are already existing in the car park. In terms of the walkway at the back is the same length, and as has been pointed out, that walkway is actually in existence already and does go around the back of the existing disabled bays. So we're not changing the bay shape or size in terms of what's here. In terms of actual provision for disabled drivers, we're keeping the same number of spaces, but we're now adding the provision of disabled access EV charging, which isn't available and is in a shocking state commercially across York and across the country. And the hyperhub itself has been designed to be disabled accessible. So in terms of just moving the bays, there is an impact to disabled drivers. If you take the project as a whole, there's a net positive impact for disabled drivers, particularly in 7 to 8 years when all Motability cars will be EV. Now, the hyperhub design itself has been specifically designed with disabled drivers in mind. We have 360 access around the chargers, no curbs, no bump stops, and we've done everything we can to ensure that disabled drivers can use the hyperhub without assistance, without any problems. So when you're asking for an impact, there are impacts of every part of this project, and some of them are positive and some of them are negative.
Okay, Councillor Craghill.
Yeah, what I'm trying to understand is when you started off designing this, and you start off with a kind of blank slate in a sense of where shall we put the EV hubs, and yeah, why is it necessary that the design that you arrive at involves moving the disabled parking spaces? Why can't you not do that from the beginning of the design?
A number of reasons. Firstly, the hyperhub is a 24-hour facility, as our other two are. And by moving it further into the car park, we arrive at a situation where the car park would be closed or could be closed. And the hyperhub would therefore not be accessible. Secondly, again, this is a disabled accessible facility, and disabled users need to be able to get in and out of the hyperhub just as anyone else does. Placing it further into the car park increases the amount of foot traffic, both from able-bodied and disabled people through the main car park. Charge times on the hyperhubs are between 30 minutes to an hour and a half normally. So people don't stay with their vehicles, they'll often leave and go elsewhere. There's also a cost element to it. By moving it further into the car park, we then have to bring the electrical connections further in. The more distance you add to that, the more expensive it gets. I could go on. A big one for the council is that locations elsewhere in the car park require a much larger loss of parking space. We're probably looking at about 20 to 30 spaces lost, and that would severely diminish the capacity of the car park.
Okay, thank you. So I can see the point you made about disabled users of the hyperhub. So a bit of a choice there about perhaps somebody needing to walk further to get out of the car park. But yeah, you've said, I mean, there is quite a bit of space along that section of the car park to choose from, isn't there? Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
Councillor Perry.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask about sort of vehicle numbers using it. The speaker, Flick Williams, suggested, obviously, if it's hyperhub, there'll be more traffic coming in. It'll be more like a petrol forecourt. Do we have any idea what the sort of difference is between traffic using it as a car park and the number of vehicles that will be then crossing? Because obviously where the pedestrians will be crossing will be where vehicles are coming in and out.
So to give you the figures from both our other hyperhubs last month, we did 1,898 charging sessions. So that's over 16 bays effectively. We found that most people visiting hyperhubs stay for approximately 1 hour is a good average time. How that compares with dwell times at Union Terrace depends on why they're there. Visitors to the hospital and university tend to be staying 3 to 4 hours. Visitors to the town centre would probably park all day. If you're looking for a haircut at a local shop, for instance, it might be half an hour to an hour. So it's similar for dwell times to local shops. It will be a higher turnover for those going further than those going further afield.
Councillor Melly?
Thank you, Chair. So the proposed hyperhub is in the section closest to the road, and then the proposed new accessible bays further in. Why can't they be the other way around? Why can't they be swapped around? Why can't you leave the accessible parking spaces at the point closest to the road and put the hyperhub?
Firstly, again, because the hyperhub in front of the car park means that the car park can be closed.
It would still be to the front of the car park. It's quite an expansive car park. It would still be very
As
close
in,
to
are
the
you suggesting we
entrance.
leave the disabled bays inside the area of the hyperhub, or to
No,
create
just
a
move the
separate?
hyperhub, a few meters further into the car park. It would, you'd still be very close to the entrance of the car park. It'd still be nowhere near the expansive parking section that goes up north or the coach area. It'd still be very close to the entrance.
Because of the way the car park is shaped with this sort of rather strange left-hand tight turn in from the main road, in order to do that, you'd have to literally flip the canopy of the hyperhub, if you like, onto the opposite side of that fence, with the loss of what's that, about 30 or more parking spaces, in order to allow traffic to still turn into those disabled bays. One of the reasons we chose that location in terms of just loss of parking space, if we would reduce it down to that, is that there's a very large area in that centre that's not used because it just doesn't fit well with the flow of traffic. You can't put parking spaces in it, and it's not used for anything else. It's just a walkway.
So you feel like having the hyperhub a little bit further in, where the proposed blue badge space in, would make it too far away?
We haven't been able to get a design without significantly moving that to the sort of northwest here by a good 30 metres that would allow vehicle manoeuvres around the hyperhub to actually access and leave the charging area. So we would have to move to 20, 30 metres to the northwest, which would take out about 30 parking spaces.
Okay. I had another question about replacement cycle parking, because looks like the details of that aren't provided yet. They're conditioned in the future. But have you got an idea yet of where they might be located?
The idea was, if you see where the motorbike parking bays are at the moment, there's I believe it's a hedge or a low wall, and there is space behind that where we could easily put bike racks in. That was the first suggestion. It keeps them out of the way of the general public. It keeps them out of the way of vehicles. They're not going to be sort of hit by a passing car or anything like that.
Does that leave enough space? So there's another 2 accessible parking bays that are to be retained up there at the kind of.
If you see where the red dot is on the screen now,
Yeah.
There's a sort of low wall in front of those motorbike bays before inside the coach, behind the coach bays.
Yeah.
We were looking at putting the opposite side of that wall.
So the other side of that wall at the moment is footpath. It's pedestrian access to get to the toilets from those accessible bays.
No, it's not.
No?
That wall goes all the way around the corner and separates them. That is currently, there's an information board and a ticket machine that I don't think has worked in quite a long time.
Okay.
It's only used by coach parties as they alight from the coach in those last 3 bays. And most of them just go through the car park.
Okay, any further questions? If I could just ask one then, in terms of the compound area shown, is that the smallest area that compound could be? Obviously it takes up the entire length of from the first car parking space to the sort of grassed area at the other end.
It's actually larger than needed to be, and it purely at the moment shows Northern Power Grid's preferred position for the substation. Our suggestion for Northern Power Grid is we actually move that slightly to the north, allowing us to retain a footpath down the back of the hyper hub, though we'd probably be talking to some of our colleagues over at the road safety team to see if having a footpath that ran down the south side of the hyper hub would be good with reversing traffic. It might require the installation of bollards, which wouldn't exactly be much of an advantage. It would just restrict traffic movement. But we can reduce the compound size a little. We could also move the internal components around to create a different shape if that was required. And also in there is foundations potentially for a battery in the future, which we aren't including in the current build in terms of the technology we're installing. But if that was omitted, we could reduce that even further.
So it might be possible for the route from the Blue Badge parking to be down the south side of the electric hub and remove the need to cross in front of the entrance?
The route, yeah, entirely. We did propose that on one of the suggestions of where to move the sail bays and move them onto the south side of the car park with that as a route through. But it wasn't a popular choice, so we didn't include that in this application. In terms of the pedestrian route, the one we've marked as the safest, we don't. If this was to go ahead as it is, we wouldn't want to encourage people to walk through the hyper hub area, simply because there are reversing vehicles, which is why the route diverts people straight out onto the public footpath at the shortest point. Are you saying, could we do an alternative route to the south? There's a potential to, yes, but we'd need to look at whether that's safe for people to walk down there with reversing traffic around.
When you say it wasn't popular, who wasn't it popular with?
Neil, can you remember who we spoke to in the council? It was one of the, there was an engineer had a look at all our proposed designs and said this
Was it Ian Stokes?
It may well have been.
I can't remember the detail of the conversation, but yeah, it was Ian Stokes who's been involved from Highways.
Would it involve removing that green space and those trees, or could it be?
No. All the work's done within the existing car park, and the hyper hubs have been designed to fit onto the existing tarmac surface rather than doing any significant sort of excavation or changes to the layout.
But you'd need to move the hyper hub slightly further north, and would that impact the turning circle?
We actually have enough room behind there for a walkway. The legs of the canopy aren't at the furthest end points, and there's a sort of lozenge shaped area we put at the end of the hyper hub on each end to facilitate vehicles turning around it and for people to move around under the canopy. So there's already sufficient room for a walkway.
Okay. Any further questions, Councillor Melling?
Yes, so for people parking in the car park
Mhm.
and leaving the car park, there'll be a demarked walkway to encourage people out through the vehicle entrance and down the pavement on the road rather than going through the hyper hub.
That's correct. I mean, that is already in existence. It's just extremely faded, but it's been
But
largely
people
ignored.
approaching the car park in the other direction, coming from Gillygate or the town centre, approaching the car park, they will reach the southernmost pedestrian access and potentially go in that way because they won't have yet reached the vehicle access with demarked pavement. So pedestrians approaching from the town centre
Our
will
current
be
proposal-
walking through the hyper hub area.
Our current proposal was to put a sign at the entrance on that brick wall, which just says pedestrian access to hyper hub only, or no access to car park or something similar, with directions to continue following the path around to the car park.
So it would be a loss of that direct pedestrian access to Gillygate effectively.
Yes.
By encouragement rather than by actually blocking it off.
Yeah. And it would still be usable by hyperhub users. So if you're charging your car, that is the pedestrian access you would use, but we wouldn't want to encourage people through there to cut across the middle of the charging area and towards the marked on there.
So that access, that southernmost pedestrian access, which is currently really for, the shortest route possible for blue badge holders as an efficient, quick access to town, will instead become a quick, efficient access to town to hyperhub users instead of blue badge.
I think
holders.
first of all, that assumes that everyone's going to town, and there's 4 very popular locations there: the park, the hospital, the university, and town. So I think it's a bit unfair to suggest that everyone's going to town through that access gate. I'd also suggest it's a bit unfair to suggest it's only for blue badge holders. I think it was a convenient pedestrian access point. if anything, it mainly serves cyclists who have the bike racks right in that corner. So yes, I would say it's a fractionally longer route round for your average person parking to just use the main gate rather than coming out that corner. I don't think that's a huge sort of issue for most people in a parking car park.
Councillor Oram?
Thank you, Stuart, and thanks for all the work you did at Monk's Cross. We got there, didn't we? In the end,
We got there.
One of the rationales for putting it there and not further into the car park, you said the car park closed at night?
Officially, our car parks do close, and we're now starting to see things like AMPR systems, the camera operated systems. We've just installed one at Marygate and at Coppergate, I believe. I don't know whether it will be rolled out across all council car parks, but again, we're seeing things like Monk's Cross now as barrier activation, and at some point in the future will be closed at a certain time of night. If we put the hyperhub further into the car park and at some point that system goes in, we would lose access to the hyperhub after car park closing time.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay, are there any further questions? I can't see any, so I'll sorry, Councillor Crackhill, just in time.
Before you go away, can you just clarify what discussion you had with representatives of disability groups while you were designing?
Yes, so it's been quite an ongoing process since we started doing the hyperhubs. We started talking, there haven't been any particularly official groups of disabled EV drivers, but we do frequent quite a lot of social media groups. One in particular is a group led by Roger Warner, who's a wheelchair user and an EV driver. He's sort of given us pointers and discussion about what we're doing and how we could improve things. Along with our suppliers such as BP Pulse, who've been involved in the writing of PAS 1889. Roger himself actually came to review the hyperhubs, and he said it's one of the best accessible facilities he's ever seen. The majority of what's out there in the commercial space at the moment do not consider wheelchair users. Main problems are curbs, chargers being placed behind curbs or in sort of gravelled areas, bump stops and impact protection, preventing you getting physically to the charger, and also a lack of space around the vehicles. The hyperhubs all have effectively a full disabled width bay with hatch markings on all sides and full 360-degree access around the charger with no curbs or plinths or things to trip you up.
Okay, I can't see any further questions then, so
If I can add, if you'd like to watch the video, Roger's got it on YouTube. It's a good channel to watch.
Thank you very much. I'd like to return. Okay, if there's any further questions then for officers, Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering whether we could be shown on the plan at what point there could be a barrier now or in the future to close the car park at night.
I'm not sure that's it.
There is taking a photograph. Should we pick it out? There's a height restriction barrier at the moment. Maybe it's here. Oh, there you go. There's a height restriction barrier there. I don't know, I was there about 4 hours ago. I don't remember any other barrier other than that.
So putting the height, this current plans would still leave it closed at night rather than 24-hour access.
I think if there were the separate questions shown on the other drawing, public security questions. I think where the separate questions, you could block it there and you still come into it.
Okay,
Can I just ask why we close our car parks at night?
That's not a planning issue for us, I guess, is it at the moment?
I'm just curious.
I think it is. We've got these.
Councillor Daubney?
It does seem strange because if you park in the evening, you discover that your ticket goes on until 8 o'clock next morning. So I think overnight parking is discouraged, but if you had a late council meeting, for example, and I expect a few of us have parked there, and finish at 10:30 or 11 o'clock,
Oh,
we're
okay.
still able to leave, let's say.
Any further questions for officers? No. Councillor Melly?
It seems like there's still potentially a few amendments to these plans in the future. These don't seem like the final design. You know, we've heard that there might be a physical barrier that's moved or inserted, and there might be a path inserted, and the battery storage or whatever, that compound might be moved northwards a little bit. It seems like this actually isn't really the final plans. I'm just wondering how, if we approve this, how much it can then be tweaked in the future without needing a change to the planning application. And
I guess it's a bit like the first item that you determined today. There are ways of amending a planning application, either minor material amendments. For example, if you change what went in the compound, we would probably consider that non-material because it's entirely surrounded by a fence. If you changed the location of the parking bays, it's a tricky one really, because it's not the parking services change those parking bays as they stand at the moment. They wouldn't require planning permission. It's not development. We're talking about the relocation of those bays now because it directly flows from a planning application which involves development. So we grant planning permission for a new set of bays, but the parking services could then potentially, outside of the planning condition we put up, could change them without permission. So it depends on the scale, really, what you do. We often find minor tweaks. You find you open the ground and realize there's a sewer in the way, or the cable wasn't where you thought it was, and it rather depends on the scale as to what they do to change it. I think if planning permission was granted, they squeezed the size of the compound and created a walkway along the southern side of the car park, we'd probably say that was a we'd probably say that was a non-material amendment. They have to make an application, but it's not one that we could sort over. It's an administrative change.
So Melly?
And we heard from a representative of the applicant that potentially relocating it somewhere else further into the car park would have an increased cost in terms of cabling and that sort of thing. That isn't a planning consideration at all, is it?
No, it's not. If you feel that the scheme is in front of us today is not acceptable, then potentially, and you wish to refuse it, then as it stands at the moment, I would say that that wouldn't be an issue in terms of the potential costs. If an applicant came back to us and said, well, these costs kill the scheme, would you like to reappraise that? Then that might be a time to take that into account.
So say if my main concern from moving the blue badges was the conflict that comes from crossing the entrance to the hyperhub, but we've heard that it may be possible to have a route through the sort of south of the hyperhub, potentially if the compound is moved to the north a little bit, and presumably a requirement to lose a couple of parking spaces immediately to the west of it. And potentially, I guess you could move that proposed blue badge parking along the boundary with the properties on Clarence Terrace and sort of further reduce the sort of walking distance that would be required. If I thought that was a better approach because it would remove that conflict with the entrance and reduce the walking distance, is that something that could be changed in the conditions, or would it need could it be sort of approved but subject to a scheme which shows a route along the south, unless that can't be done?
My only slight concern is if we should be reconsulting, if we decide the blue badge space should be somewhere else, whether we might get objected. I'm just slightly concerned because that structure is 2.4 metres high. If we put the blue badge spaces further on this wall, then the user then might feel they're hidden from public view, particularly in evening use, at least where they are now. It's by the main route and out, but they might feel they're hidden out of the way and they feel concerned about safety. So it might not be an issue, but I think it'd be worthwhile liaising with, representatives to see if they feel that within this scheme you can find a solution.
But could you take a view that the route along the south sounded quite possible, and then a view that somewhere in that space you could have the blue badge parking, if it was along the boundary wall, if it was where it's suggested, if it was instead 3 rows of 3 rather than a 1 long row of 7, that there's some configuration that might work that wouldn't have the blue badge parking out onto the main entrance and exit, and require a crossing over the entrance to the hyper hub.
I think you do it. Either way, my advice would be that was a deferral to see what the applicant takes away the reason for deferral and sees what they can come up with, and then it's how you deal with what happens after the drawings come in. So I think, given the objections on the basis of the location of the blue badge holder spaces, it's something we would want to consult over. I guess it's whether you wish to have the whole thing back to committee, or whether you defer to officers in consultation with the chair and vice chair, depending on what we hear from the consultees. I think there's another option, but that's it.
There's always a third one. Any further questions? Councillor Crackhill?
Just to say I did have my hand up, but you were concentrating over there, but I was going to raise the question of deferral, so I do think it's something we should be looking at.
On Councillor Orrell.
Yeah, would it be possible to ask Speaker Stewart whether that area had been considered, and whether that had been consulted on with disability groups?
I think he said it had been considered, but that the council officer had suggested that they thought this approach was better.
Right, okay.
Councillor Melly?
He also said that disability groups hadn't actually been consulted on the location of the replacement parking, only on the design of the hub.
I guess they were consulted as part of the planning application on this proposal, but not the options.
Yeah, I'll move the meeting on. I mean, either we agree with it or we don't. And might I suggest that somebody moves it, and if
you don't like it, then vote against it. I mean, we can go on like this all night. I'm going at 6 o'clock because my time is far more valuable than sitting here listening to nitpicking and God knows what.
Okay, I thought we were making progress, but Councillor Crackhill.
Well, I would like to propose deferral so that officers can go away and well, I was coming to that. But that's what I would like to propose. I am a bit confused still about this new process because I thought you said something slightly different this evening. But
The new constitution requires us to ask whether if anybody's willing to move the officer's recommendation as a starting point, and then from there we see what happens. Once
so
we
if
finish
we're
the
not,
debate
if
stage.
nobody's willing, we can then propose
Yes.
something else.
If
Right.
nobody's willing to do that, then we'll ask for further proposals.
I'm willing. So we'll resolve.
Can I just say, we all jump up and down about arguing about reducing carbon CO2 emissions. My own view is that I think electric hubs will eventually become obsolete as hydrogen technology takes over, but that's nothing to do with this application. I do think that whichever car, and I take my good friend, Councillor Kilbane makes a point. It's no different to any other car park. In fact, it's probably better for pedestrians and disabled people than any other car park in the city centre. So to help matters along, I will move that permission be granted as applied for, with further discussions about what people are concerned about. I'm sure that they can talk. I mean, damn it, it is a council application. It's not some fly-by-night outfit from outer space. So I'll move that permission be granted, and if people will vote against it, then as far as I'm concerned, that's fine, but at least we'll get a decision.
Okay. So just finished questions to officers. We don't want to skip the debate phase, but I'll take your point. But if anybody would like to make any contributions in terms of the debate, now is the time to do it. If not, I'm happy to take Councillor Galvin's proposal and ask if anybody's willing to second that. Councillor East seconding.
No. Much as I admire my good friend Councillor Galvin, I'm not offering to second. I'm just trying to work out what's happening here. Do we move into debate after the proposal, or do we have to have the debate before the proposal? Because
We have the debate before the proposal.
Right.
It just so happens that Councillor Galvin, as part of that.
I just don't want to miss out on the debate bit. That's all.
Well, if you'd like to debate, then
Sure. Yeah. Sure. I'm very happy to kick us off. I just want to remind the committee that we do have a hierarchy of transport users within the council, and at the top of that hierarchy is pedestrians and people with mobility problems, and they must always come first when we're making our plans and when we're allocating space, etc., within the city. So as far as the issue of the amount of car parking spaces we would or we wouldn't have, or how convenient this would be for drivers of electric cars, that must come further down our consideration in our deliberations to the needs of pedestrians and those with mobility issues, whether you like it or not, because that is our actual policy within the council. In terms of the public sector equality duty that requires us as part of our deliberations today to advance equality of opportunity amongst people, I can't really see how, if we approved this proposal, we would be fulfilling that duty. In fact, I think we would probably be going against that duty. We have within the report the acceptance that by moving the blue badge spaces, it adds an extra 50 to 55 metres to journeys heading south into town. We know it's been raised by one of the public speakers, but I'm sure we also know that, you know, in order to get a blue badge, you must be somebody who can't walk without help or find it very difficult, painful, causes breathlessness, and you will automatically get a blue badge if you are unable to walk further than 50 metres and you're in receipt of PIP. So it would seem to me quite perverse for us to approve an application that increased the distance that blue badge holders have to walk by 50 metres. And I don't see how us approving this application would in any way comply with our duty to advance the equality of opportunity between persons. In fact, I think we would be derelict in that duty, and we would be making the situation worse for people who are blue badge holders. So as you may be able to surmise by my comments, I would be, if we ever get to the point, proposing that we actually refuse this application, and that's my view.
any further debate? Councillor Melly?
Yes, I agree with all of that. I think no one's disputed the need for electric vehicle charging or the principle of having a hub in this car park. It's the details that we need to look at. I think the details of this application aren't acceptable development for all the reasons that have just been said. In addition to the loss of a pedestrian access, but the extra distance to have to travel to the accessible parking, that moving the accessible parking from a quiet corner into the path, the busiest path of traffic in the whole car park right near the entrance. It seems to be a reduction in pedestrian safety, a reduction in accessibility, etc., etc. And the reasons that have been given for why those things can't be mitigated or why those things are necessary, why a different scheme couldn't be brought forward, either aren't planning considerations like increased costs, or they just don't exist, like a hypothetical future barrier that actually isn't there and also isn't a consideration. So yes, I'm also minded to refuse.
Just to make the point, Chair, quite agree with my colleagues on the other side of the table. When somebody was designing this car park, one thing they did was place those disabled drivers or drivers with disabilities spaces bang next to the exit. And they did that for a reason. It was to minimize the distance people had to walk to leave the car park to begin their journey. So I think we should look at it again, or ask officers to do so, to find the shortest possible route for those drivers to take to leave the car park. It's that simple. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I'm looking now for somebody willing to second Councillor Galvin's proposal, which I'm not seeing. Sorry. Thank you.
That's fine.
I'm sorry, but that's fallen. So I'm going to have a go at proposing deferral because on the basis of finding a route and a sort of layout for the disabled parking that doesn't require crossing the entrance to the hyper hub and looks into the potential of an access point along the south side of the compound, which would then minimize the distance or the additional distance blue badge holders would need to travel. And I'll ask whether Gareth thinks that makes sense. Yep. Okay. Could ask Gareth
Yes,
first. Okay.
I do think it does make sense. That there is I suppose on deferral, there's just the issue of how you deal with revisions that may come back.
Okay. Presumably come back to the full committee.
Fine, that's okay.
Okay, Councillor Crackhill and then Councillor Melly.
I'm just not quite clear not clear about how you're defining your proposed deferral. I suppose I would like to make it a bit more open than that, to actually ask officers to be looking at improving ways of improving the options for blue badge holders overall. As Councillor Daubney said, I think the current location is really close to the exit, isn't it? Or there was also, I think you also suggested looking further at least moving the spaces onto the south boundary. Is that what you just said? Because perhaps I just didn't take it in very well.
Yeah, I think it's looking at those aspects, but not assuming what the answer might be to those, because that would require, I think,
Perhaps
probably
making
consultation
clear
with.
we're looking for the maximum improvement in terms of
I think
the blue badge spaces.
I suppose the issue there is the distance that's being travelled, isn't it? And minimising that rather than necessarily. Councillor Melly and then Councillor Kilbane.
I think what you're proposing would be a completely new scheme. I think the amount of changes that would be needed to address those points really warrant reconsultation and resubmission. I don't think it's something that can just be done with small tweaks or a clarification of certain information to then be brought back to committee. I think there's grounds to refuse, and if the council want to submit a new schemes which addresses the reasons for refusal, then obviously they're free to do that. But I think the kind of changes that would be needed and the ones that you just outlined just now when you proposed it are too much for deferral to be the appropriate solution.
I don't agree, but that's a that's a point of difference. Councillor Perry.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not as comfortable with deferral as well, because it's something that, we obviously don't have the information in front of us whether or not that proposal we would make on the hoof tonight is actually feasible. I think if we're not comfortable with this application as it stands, refusal would probably be where I would prefer for us to go, just because then they have the opportunity to bring forward a revised scheme. Council officers are in attendance, they'll be able to watch what we've suggested tonight and they'll get a sense of what we would find more suitable in terms of options. I don't think deferral is the right way to go. It's not just a little tweak that we could condition. I think it would be potentially a completely different scheme that would have to come forward.
Yeah, I think I had Councillor Kilbane.
Just to support that, really. I mean, I think deferral is pussyfooting around with the issue. I mean, the issue is that we shouldn't be increasing the distance that blue badge holders have to walk, full stop. And a deferral, I'm really, really uncomfortable with that. I think, the schemes come before us. I think we should refuse on the grounds that's been outlined. And if the council wants to come back with a better scheme, then great.
Councillor Melly, sorry. Go Councillor Melly first.
Yes, I mean, it's not just distance. Obviously, the distance is an issue, increasing the distance, the blue badge spaces so considerably, but it's also the nature of the route to exit the car park. I mean, as has been said, putting the route on the busiest kind of roadway in near the entrance, having to cross the entrance to the hyper hub, all those sorts of things I think are relevant too. There are blue badge holders, people who need accessible spaces, who can walk and do walk miles, but are impaired, have a visual impairment or something like that. That means that it's not safe to navigate. Yeah, those sorts of car park surroundings, which currently is catered for in the current location of the accessible spaces.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I would strongly oppose refusal. I think we need to go for deferral and give clear guidance to officers as to what we are concerned about on the grounds that a deferral will, I think, enable them to bring a varied application to committee faster than it would if it was refused, which I think suspect would need further consultation on a new scheme. We desperately need charging hubs. It's not a question of whether we want the hyper hub. It's just a question of ensuring that the hyper hub doesn't adversely affect disabled drivers. And that is the key. I think deferral will give a quicker turnaround and be better. I think refusal will be a mistake.
Okay, Councillor Orwell.
Chair, I agree completely with that. We regularly defer applications that are nearly right, but not quite. And this will give the opportunity to look again at the disabled parking position and come back with improved solutions to that issue. And as Councillor Fisher says, we desperately need hyper hub charging facilities. And earlier on, Stuart had said that the facilities that we've got in other areas are far superior in terms of helping disabled people than many other places. So we're almost there, but it needs looking at carefully in connection with positioning the disabled bays.
Okay, I would like to draw this to a close. I think we're reaching the point where we've got two fairly entrenched views that we could backwards and forwards all night. But Councillor Melly and then Councillor Kilbane, and then
I was just going to say, yes, absolutely, we need EV charging facilities. Again, I don't think anyone's disputing that, but we also desperately need accessible parking facilities. the amount of parking at Blue Badge Parking City Centre has already been cut off completely and drastically reduced. We can't also move what's left even further away from the city centre.
Councillor Kilbane?
Yeah, just to emphasise the point, really, nobody here is suggesting we don't need EV parking, EV charging facilities. Of course we do. But if we are to redo this scheme, then it absolutely needs to be reconsulted on with the groups that it affects, including those people who represent blue badge holders. It absolutely needs to happen, because as we've seen time and time again with this council, we are not in a position to decide what's best for them. Absolutely, they need to be reconsulted and make sure that their views are incorporated into the scheme.
Councillor Crackhill?
Gareth can come back if on this, if there is, if I'm wrong, but I don't see that deferral precludes incorporating consultation into the process that officers undertake when they go away to look at this. They've heard all of our concerns and suggestions about improving the disabled parking and the location and the design. So I think deferral will still do that job, as Councillor Fisher said. It will be quicker though, because we do also need to progress the EV parking. We shouldn't be setting one against the other. So I would be happy to second your proposal to defer.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've got a proposal which has been seconded. Gareth, if you're able to give us a summary, and perhaps if that does specifically reference further consultation, if that would be.
Yeah. So you're seeking deferral in order to investigate the provision of a walkway on the southern boundary of the site. A consequential amendment to the location of the blue badge holder spaces that doesn't require crossing the entrance to the hyperhub and minimises the distance to the Clarence Street entrance, and recognising that's may involve the redesign of the compound. And back to committee. And we would, as just as we do under general procedures, I think of an alteration of that that scale. We would go back to people who have made comments on the application already and seek their views on any revised plans that come in.
Okay. So I hope we're all clear on that. If so, if we can put it to a vote then, so I can see those in favour of the proposal. That's fine. All those against? Okay, so that's been passed. So the other item 4C, which is the
yes, the
advertising
advertisement
board.
I would suggest deferring it as well for consideration. We don't know if it might move slightly.
Okay.
But it would seem sensible to take them both together.
Okay. Well, I'll move deferral of that item as well. Councillor Fisher seconded. If I could see then all those in favour. Okay, that's unanimous. Okay. Right, so there's no urgent business to take, so we'll close the meeting there. Thank you very much.